Chapter 23 essentially talks mostly about the Industrial Revolution, and we'll talk about a little bit from the chapter today, point out a couple of terms that you want to make sure and know for your test. But I do want to point out to you that as you're looking through this material, keep in mind it's not just talking about the Industrial Revolution as a historical event, but it's talking about the cultural impact that it had on the societies that it was a part of. So we start the Industrial Revolution, which is a term, by the way, in Great Britain. It happened there first. And it's really not some small thing when we mention Great Britain here, because Great Britain is a small little island. And so what happens is amazing, really. We see this revolution take off, grow, build momentum before it ever leaves the island. And so it's really remarkable what happens when it finally does leap over that English Channel into mainland Europe. By the way, as I look down, I'm looking at my notes in case you're curious. We see a major change in society in that we see more manufactured goods, we see markets improving, the economy becomes stronger. We also see a shift. People are moving out of farms and moving into the city. So part of this that you want to make sure and know about are two major new inventions. Number one is the spinning jenny, and number two is the water frame. These two are some of the most major impacts on the Industrial Revolution. Unfortunately, there are pros and cons to this, and we'll get a little further into this pretty soon. But the Industrial Revolution is not, it's definitely not all good. There's a lot of young people particularly that are exploited, the people that cannot afford anything else but just the clothes on their back. These people are often exploited in a very terrible way. But that being said, historically speaking, and this is not Christy the Christian, this is the historian looking back. Had we not had these events, for the good and the bad of them, we would not be where we are today. You wouldn't be looking on a computer watching me talk however many miles away. You wouldn't be able to pause me talking and take notes or highlight something. This Industrial Revolution needed to happen for us to be where we are now, for your phone to ring, for you to text, for you to Snapchat or whatever it is. These are things that all really did get their start here. Excuse me. Another major invention is the steam engine. For the most part, we associate steam engine with James Watt. Now, he didn't invent it, but he did improve upon it in a way that's very, very important to the Industrial Revolution. He used a coal-burning system that allowed for this energy to be harnessed in a number of industrial ways. We also see it used in mills, in factories, etc., and it really does play a pretty large role. Another thing I want to mention to you from your text is George Stephenson's rocket. This is a locomotive or a train that he basically builds that's going to transport heavy loads from Liverpool to Manchester there in England. And this is going to revolutionize we've got the means of production that come in with the Industrial Revolution. The advent and the use of railroads is what's going to change what it means to be an industrial giant, because I can move my products that I create here in the factory over to you who will purchase it. And so this is a pretty big deal. We see a number of people getting jobs. Unskilled laborers can work on the railroad. This is bigger than just creating a railroad or building a railroad, because it's not just the people working there laying down tracks. It's the timber industry that's influenced, because they're building, or excuse me, they're we're going to need the timber to make the railroad ties, and we're going to need the steel industry to make the rails for the trains to go on. So it's a pretty big deal. Another term from your text is the Crystal Palace, truly a sign of the Industrial Revolution, as it is going to be the masterpiece that really does show the rest of the world what the Industrial Revolution has accomplished, as it's a glass and iron megastructure. You also see Thomas Malthus, who wrote an essay on the principle of population, where basically he said that he was very concerned about population. He said that the population increases would always outpace the growth of industrial food production. And taking kind of a step beyond that is David Ricardo. He's an economist who basically theorized about the iron law of wages, which is another term for your test. He essentially says that these population growth issues that are concerns might even cause or might even impact wages, which we certainly see that. The more people that are willing to work and able to work, then I have to pay you less because I can pick up another 10 where you left off. So these are some issues certainly to be considering. As we see the Industrial Revolution take off, it means that it's now going to jump over into mainland Europe. There's two important people that your book talks about. Number one is John Cockerell. He's the guy that moved the Industrial Revolution from England to Belgium because at this point it's still a pretty big secret, and so they need help bringing the revolution there. And so Cockerell is going to be the guy that brings people in from England secretly to Belgium so that he can start that revolution there. And then there's Fritz Harcourt, who brought the industrialization to Germany. He had to also bring in workers. He didn't have people, skilled workers in Germany that could run the factories, and so he brought in people from England. As it's moving into Europe, you see the need for several European nations. The French are a pretty good example of this, imposing tariff protections, which, by the way, if you're trying to find me I'm on page 699. They are going to impose these tariffs to try and protect the country goods makers so that hopefully if I'm going to make something in my home country and sell it, I want you to buy my goods rather than somebody else's. So they're going to tariff and tax out the goods that come from another country higher than mine, and so you're more inclined to buy my goods. You also see the doctrine of economic nationalism, where government policies are now formulated to protect the national economy, and it's an encouraging thing for the factory owners and those that hold the means of production. On page 701 talks a little bit about the new class of factory owners. These are wealthy men who are going to they may be highly educated or they may not be, but they've got the money to build a factory and employ people that can do that. Religious discrimination had declined at this point in the business world, so Protestants, Quakers, Scots, Jews, all over the place, they're able to find jobs, and it's going to dramatically impact the economic environment. You also see that wealth has a great impact here. Unfortunately, people are not making great money as factory workers, but if you are the factory owner, then you're doing pretty good because you're just making money. You can control how much other people are making, etc. And so you can make very good money and your wealth just continues to grow. You also see the impact on women. You see women in successful business families were allowed fewer roles in business because they're valued for their ladylike refinement. Also during this time period, we see some changes in the factory workers. One interesting example are the Luddites. These are industrial terrorists who attacked factories and the means of production. Basically, they break into a factory and destroy the main machines in it because they felt like the machines had stolen their jobs. Very frustrated, very pessimistic. We also see the rise of Friedrich Engels, whose name might sound familiar to you, who blamed industrial capitalization for the brutal work environment. Folks, let's face it, these factories and factory owners were terrible to their employees. It didn't matter if you're a man, woman, or child. If you're not working in a way that makes them happy, that gets them the big bucks, then they're going to somehow brutalize and terrorize you. We see a number of deaths, and some of them are not accidents. We also see a change in workers' wages. Some of them are making more than others, but for the most part, it's an hourly pay. Not very much money if they don't show up to work on time. They're docked. If they fall asleep on the job, they're docked. Clothing is less expensive, so that's a plus, but we also see housing. The level of housing is horrendous. People are living in holes, basically, and some of them are even living in the factories because they can't afford a home. Some important pieces of legislation do come in during this time period. You have the Factory Act of 1833 that addresses concerns about children. Too often children are suffering serious injury and even death in the factory, and so social concerns are going to be what drives this Factory Act of 1833, and so they passed this law that limited children's working hours and addressed age requirements of child workers. Of course, this is problematic because some families families are reliant upon all members of their family being able to work. Separate spheres is another term for your test. This is where you see married working class women. They're more likely to take full-time employment after having their first child, where you have the husbands living in a more public sphere. And this is kind of a little bit more about that cultural shift that comes with the Industrial Revolution. You also have the Mines Act of 1842. This is going to more specifically deal with the problem of the mines. We see a number of men, women, children, male and female children working in mines, and this is specifically aimed at women and girls. The idea here is that it's not socially acceptable anymore for women and girls to work in these mines. There's concerns about children's morals, specifically girls, because they're such in close quarters. It's so hot in these mines. Often they're stripping down as bare as they can get because they are just dying of heat. So we see the banning of underground work for women, girls, and even boys under the age of 10. Make sure you read through this chapter. Hopefully it'll help you as you're getting ready for your first quiz or your quiz for this week. Thanks.